Computer equipment sometimes fails at the most inopportune moment. Your display monitor goes on the fritz when you have to do something very important for your boss very quickly, or a projector that you previously connected to successfully isn't connecting now and you have to give a presentation. Let's talk about some common issues related to display monitors, projectors, and what we might do to solve it using a structured troubleshooting methodology. Display monitor issues could come in many forms. Always think about the easy stuff first, such as making sure the cables are plugged in to the right ports and they're plugged in tightly. As an example, I remember going and traveling to many different locations to deliver training courses over the years, and in some cases, at the front of the classroom, there would be a wall panel with a number of different video connectors, some VGA, some HDMI, and it was used for either a projection unit in the room, hooked up in the ceiling, or it could be used with monitors placed on student desks throughout the entire classroom. But the question is, if I didn't set it up and I don't know that environment, I might not know exactly what I should be plugging into. So always make sure you either find out from somebody that knows, or you take notes if you've done it before, what you should be plugging into. Make sure you're plugged into the right thing. You might also have to make sure that you check wireless connectivity, signal strength. Now, what does that have to do with display monitors and projectors? Let's talk about it. These days, if you're in a conference center and you're going to be giving a presentation, you might either plug into a projector, maybe through a VGA cable, HDMI, or you might connect wirelessly. And screencasting is also very popular, where we can take something on a mobile device, like a slideshow of pictures, music, movies, and have it show up elsewhere, such as on a larger screen. Now that can happen wirelessly, both through Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. Bluetooth requires close proximity. You can't be more than 10 or 15 meters away from the devices, and the devices have to be paired with one another. For example, here in our case, where we're screencasting something onto a television from a smartphone, the television might display a Bluetooth pairing code that we would have to enter in on the smartphone before we can be allowed to make that connection. However, Bluetooth just uses a MAC address. It's a local area network on a small scale. However, if you're using Wi-Fi connectivity to do this type of thing, well, you could be anywhere and casting to that larger television screen, for instance. But with Wi-Fi comes more complexity, because then you have to deal with IP addresses and the routing of packets and resolving names to IP addresses and all that stuff, which we will focus on a little bit later when we talk about network troubleshooting. But for now, it's something we should be aware of. Now, if you are dealing with video cables, think about how long they are. Think about external interference through EMI. That's electromagnetic interference. It's electrical noise that can cause problems with signals in nearby cables, like video cables. And the longer a video cable is, the weaker the signal becomes as it goes down the line. So, for instance, if you're dealing with HDMI, the recommendation is you shouldn't exceed approximately 25 feet with a single HDMI cable run. Now that's about 7.5 meters for you folks that are working in metric. Now that's not to say you can't go beyond it. You might say, I have a 40-foot HDMI cable and it works just fine for me. And that might be the case depending on the environment it's in. But it's safe to say that we should probably stick with the recommended standards. Think of the signal source device. Let's say that source device is my laptop, and I've got it plugged into an external second large display monitor. Well, if I've got a large stereo speaker nearby that has a magnet in it, that can cause problems. Maybe you've seen something that looks like this in the past. The issue is, what caused it? What can we do to fix it? Well, I've had this kind of thing happen with having magnets nearby, for example, from large stereo speakers. Or you might have a physical problem with the screen. The other thing to consider is, what if we just have a blank screen? What would cause that? Well, the first thing we'd have to know is if the system is using more than one monitor. The other thing we'd have to think about is there a problem with power? Even the basic stuff. Is the power cable plugged in? Is the power turned on? Or we might have a problem with our AC outlet in the wall for power. Try a different plug. The other thing is, maybe the machine is stuck in post, the power on self-test. Now that might happen if you've changed your hardware configuration recently, such as adding a new video card or RAM or a RAID controller, anything like that. Could also be related to a failing laptop battery. Over time, laptop batteries don't seem to hold their charge as they once did, and that can cause a problem beyond just a blank screen, but a blank screen is definitely symptomatic of that. We could have a problem with the video driver. Maybe we have the incorrect video driver for what we're trying to do. Perhaps it's become corrupt, or maybe if it's a Windows machine, there was a recent Windows update that automatically updated the video driver, and now things aren't working as well as they once did before. Luckily, we can view update history in Windows, and we can even roll back drivers to a previous version that worked better if we want to. We might also have a machine running in VGA mode where previously it was not in VGA mode. VGA mode gives us very basic standard graphics, and it doesn't look as good as what we might be used to. That could be the result of the machine having recently crashed. And that could be the result of perhaps an update having been applied or a hardware change. We can find out by looking at logs to see, for example, did the machine crash, and if so, when did that happen? So to solve some of these issues, we should swap out components. That means using a different cable, a different monitor, plugging a monitoring cable that doesn't seem to work on your computer into another computer that's known to be okay. We also should think about adjusting physical monitor controls if there are any. That means making sure that the brightness and the contrast are set correctly so we're not just seeing nothing. We should also make sure that the temperature isn't too high. Modern day electronics will often either slow down or shut down if the ambient temperature is much too hot. We need to check our video settings. Maybe we've set the screen resolution or the size of fonts to a point where it's partly off the screen, and so we can't see everything. We should also consider problems with drivers. Again, we can look at our update history, and we can update or even roll back drivers that are problematic. Checking operating system logs is your best bet to see if something has been happening as a recurrent pattern, or when exactly it happened, because log entries are date and time stamped. We should also think about selecting the correct input source. So if you've got a large television and you're trying to connect to it, either through wired connections or wirelessly, make sure the correct input source is selected, whether it's coming in wirelessly or physically through HDMI input 1, HDMI input 2, and so on. As a last resort, or maybe the first thing you would try, depending on the specific scenario, reboot the machine. If you're sure nothing has changed, it could be as simple as rebooting, and then things are working and back to normal. Now, that's not practical if it's a server, but if it's a laptop computer or a desktop computer, maybe that would be something to try as well.